Okay, we are now ready to begin. We are going live, and I'm going to immediately jump into our fascinating discussion. Last week, we discussed the story of Akedas Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac, and we left off with a long discussion of the issues that we have in the regards to that story, in that episode, which we continued for an hour, trying to decipher what is the truth of that story and how best to look at it. Which led us, Akiva, to a question of connecting it to an episode in the Talmud. In the story of the binding of Isaac, Abraham hears a message from God and telling him that he should bring his son up as a sacrifice to God. And supposedly Abraham obeys. Not supposedly, he does obey it. Of course, then he's told not to do it. Now we have another story which some believe to be somewhat contradictory or somewhat questionable. What we're going to see now is a story in the Talmud where an individual brings all sorts of miraculous proofs to his opinion, not only just miraculous proofs, but even a heavenly voice to prove him, yet the person is ostracized. So let me give you a bit of a background to the story. The debate that is about to take place is just after the second temple, so the destruction of the second temple, in the town of Yavne, where it's one of the greatest eras of Jewish scholarship in all of history. It's the time when the greatest and most famous rabbis, the likes of Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Gamliel, and many great, very famous people who lived, and these become the leading names in the oral Torah known as the Mishnah, and then their discussions get deciphered back in the Talmud. Okay, so this is supposedly just after the destruction of the second temple in the town of Yavne. And we open up the first scene to a debate that is getting somewhat almost appearing to be nasty. Of course, rabbinic debates don't become nasty because they're all there for the greater good. And we always discuss how in Judaism, we never hide from debates. And of course, that's replete within the Talmud. That's how we find the truth. If we have an opinion that disagrees with us and we shut them down and don't allow their opinion, then how could we ever grow and learn? However, Judaism does have certain principles, and debate is welcomed as long as it fits within the principles of debate. So first and foremost, what we have to understand is within the principles of debate. If somebody doesn't have the basic knowledge of the fundamentals of Judaism, and they want to come debate, that's a little bit, it's not a total democracy where anybody and everybody has a say. We'll discuss that in a moment. But anybody that has knowledge, that is truly a scholar, they have a say, which Judaism believes to be a much more truthful way of having democracy. Now, in our story, we're presented with a particular oven, and I'm going to share my screen with you, and we will enter the discussion of the oven. Give me a moment, I forgot to share screen. We are taken to Talmud. The Talmud, of course, is written in the approximately 5th century CE, and it goes through those first few centuries from CE, from year 1, just after the destruction of the temple. This is the era of the Talmud. Now, there's an interesting debate, which I suppose in our era, in our times, we would not even get our hands around the debate. So I don't want to focus on what they were debating about, because that's a separate discussion. I want to focus on more of what happens and how the debate plays out. So the debate is about a particular oven. Now, just for simplicity's sake, they're arguing about an oven, whether this oven is receptible to impurity or not. Jewish law says that if a vessel becomes in contact with let's say, a dead body, for example, then it becomes impure. Now, we're not going to get into what impurity is, but just let's say impurity, as we mentioned in the past, impurity is not something which is bad or evil. Impurity means that it's receptible, it's attained some level of capability of attaining not holy things in it, and it usually has some type of connection with death. Now, certain things are able to house impurity and certain things are not. It's called, whether it's a keli, where it's a receptacle for tuma. And impurity is not a good word because there is no real translation for the word tuma, or not. Now, Jewish law says that if you have a clay vessel, and it comes in contact with a dead body or any other type of impure thing, then that becomes impure. How do you get rid of the impurity? If it's made of clay, the impurity is absorbed inside. You can't get rid of it, besides for if you break it. Now, what happens if you have an oven that is built up of broken shards and rebuilt? Is it now, so broken shards cannot become impure. That's what our debate is about. Once again, I don't want to get caught up in the debate, but I want to see what happens in the debate. So this is the famous, probably one of the most famous episodes in the Talmud, but as is normal, also one of the most least understood episodes in the Talmud. So we're going to read through the story, and I want you to pay attention to it and then tell me what your feelings are about it. Okay, let's look inside. Tanan Hassam, is everyone able to see my screen? Okay, thank you. Tanan Hassam, we learned over there. Chatchu chulios. If they cut an earthenware oven, v'nasan chol ben chulya lechulya, and then they put some type of cement or sand between each thing, and they stuck it back together and made it into an oven. Rabbi Eliezer Mataher. Rabbi Eliezer says that it is ritually pure. In other words, it cannot become impure. Why? Because once it's been broken, it still remains in its broken status, even though it's been put back together. V'chachamim metamim. And the chachamim, the rabbis, said that it actually is susceptible to impure, even though that initially it was broken. Okay, I'm sure that is not going to make you lose much sleep at night. That first incident, this type of impurity does not really apply in general today. Says the Talmud in Bava Metzia, V'zeh tanur, zeu tanur shel achnai. This is the famous story of tanur shel achnai. Achnai, in this English translation over here, he puts it's probably a commentary from Rashi, a snake in this context. And it's a story of achnai, whatever that means. My achnai. He says that it was characterized in that manner due to the fact that the rabbi surrounded it with their statements like a snake, which often forms a coil when at rest and deems it. And they made it impure. Okay. Now let's get to what actually happens. So we have this debate about this thing. Let's see what the debate is. The debate is going on some, let's say, approximately 1900 years ago. The rabbis are sitting in the great Bet Midrash in Yavne, just after destruction. The greatest sages of the time are sitting there. Rabbi Eliezer says that this oven is pure. Now, all of his colleagues argue on him and say, no, it is susceptible to impurity and it can become impure. So what happened? They made it impure. The rabbis all agreed that it was impure. Tana. On that day, Rabbi Eliezer, who was the opposing opinion, he discussed this matter. We'll look at inside the translation, answered all possible answers in the world to support his opinion, but the rabbis did not accept his explanations from him. Why would they not have accepted his explanations? Because they would have said, yes, it sounds good, but we still believe that our explanations and our way of understanding it makes more sense. Okay. So let's go on with the story, and then we're going to have what to discuss. So Rabbi Eliezer says to his colleagues, if the halacha follows my opinion, he's pointed outside. He says, this carob tree outside, I will make the carob tree prove my opinion is correct. In other words, I've given you rational explanations, but you have not accepted them. You still believe that your understanding is better, or you still believe that even though you understand my understanding, so to speak, you still disagree with me. Normal. Nevertheless, he says, okay, so logic is not working anymore to convince you, but I'm so certain of my opinion, I'm going to use miracles now. So he says the carob tree outside will prove him. Now, this is the one time that we have such a situation where the rabbis had a debate, and where the loser decides that it wasn't enough to use logic, he's now going to use miracles. So we don't, as far as I don't know of any other major debates that were argued with miracles, because this is the great episode that kind of debunks that whole approach, that doesn't allow that approach, that prevents that approach, and we're going to see why. So if you understand this story, now you'll understand why there are no replicas of the story, because there cannot be any replicas of the story. The carob tree outside jumped Meya Amma. Meya Amma is approximately 50 meters. Could you imagine? That would have been quite a scene. So they're busy sitting in the Beth Medrash, and miraculously, now this is not this is not a scientific thing. This is a miracle. Miraculously, the carob tree jumps 50 ammas, 50 meters, 100 ammas. Sorry, 50 meters approximately. Arba Mayes Amma. And somebody said that actually looked like it was more like 400 ammas, which is more like 200 meters. So what did they reply to him? Very good. I'm glad that you have spiritual powers and that you're a very pious person and you're able to do great miracles. Wonderful. But it's no connection. What is the connection with the debate? That the carob tree jumped. No proof. Further he said to them, if the halacha follows my opinion, then the wellspring of water outside our Beth Medrash, our study hall, will prove it. The water, the wellspring, the river that was usually flowing in the one direction started flowing upwards, upstream. It started going in the opposite direction. Trick number 2. What did they say to this trick number 2? I'm sorry, mate. That's no proof. What's the connection? Okay. Further he said to them, if you said the halacha follows me, then the walls of this study hall will prove and suddenly the walls of the study hall started to cave in on them. Garbaim Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua reprimanded, he scolded them, as it says over here. He scolded them. If you have Torah scholars that are busy contending, they're busy arguing one with the other in law, I'd say, what are you doing here? What's your point? What are you doing it? So it says that if you look in the exact translations, what's your nature? What's your involvement in this dispute? No, this has nothing to do with you. Stay out of it. By the way, I'm not going to get into this because it's not our discussion. Our discussion is trying to understand how this relates back to the way how Avraham connects to the story of Avraham listening. So I want to try to focus on that element. But I want you to also understand that every single miracle that he was causing to happen had a specific connection to to his own personality, and he didn't just bring random miracles. They weren't random miracles. There were specific reasons why he had them. So look what happens. The walls of the study hall, lo naflu. They never continued to fall. In other words, they stayed in their spot. Out of respect for Rabbi Yeshua, they stopped coming inwards. They stopped. But they never returned to their original state. And it says that they'll still remain leaning. So if you were to be able to find that building some years later before it was destroyed, I'm sure by now it probably doesn't exist. But if you were to able to find such a building, you would have found the leaning walls of Yavne building, right? Furthermore, he said to them, now this is the most important part of the story. Till now, it's just been fun and games. Now it gets really serious. He says, if the law follows me, then I'll be proven correct from heaven. Yotzasa Baskal, suddenly a heavenly voice comes down. V'omra malachem etz Rabbi Akiva shalacha kemoise b'chol mokim. Why are you differing from Rabbi Elazar? As the Allah is in accordance with his opinion in every place that he expresses an opinion. Okay. Now, before I go further, I want to just pause for a moment and ask you, if you were witnessing this episode, you were a witness to this episode, and you see this debate happening, what would you think at this point? Who would you be siding with if you had just watched that happen? Anybody want to give their opinion?
I'd be asking to have a drink of whatever they're drinking.
Okay, we're going to take this on face value and not start questioning scientifically what the story was, as I said. But let's just if you were to be a witness to this, which side would you be taking? Would you take the side of the rabbis, or would you take the side of Rabbi Elazar?
I think I'd probably take the side of the rabbis.
Why would you take the side of the rabbis?
Because I think they're not concerned with the miracles, though the miracles sound very good. And I presume they actually saw the miracles happen. If they actually took place while they were there, correct?
Yes, they all witnessed to miracles.
I know, but it went against the halakha. It was this.
Right. Okay, very good. So you've jumped the gun. Very good. So you know the rest of the story, or maybe in some of my hints. But
I've heard the story sometime. It's quite a long time ago.
I think I've given a class myself on it not so long ago. But
yes.
but yes, no.
I was going to say not necessarily. It could be just his opinion.
Sorry.
So it could be just his opinion. I would say what the miracles have to do with the halakha.
Okay, that's what I was saying. That's what I was saying, correct? Yeah, that's a valid point. That's what Rabbi Yeshua was saying. What is the miracles got to do? But if you go back to the story of Abraham brought in his first crazy story, he's thrown into a furnace for his belief, and a miracle happens that saves his life. His brother Haran goes and is asked afterwards who he follows, and he says, I follow Abraham, and he's not saved. But anyway, miracles are very decisive. It's easy for us to stand here, but when we see miracles and people see miracles or something out of the usual, and that's totally beyond, it certainly is a convincing factor. But we know, and I think you're already coming from that perspective, that you're already aware that it shouldn't be. But hold on a second. Miracles I understand, but how can you argue with the voice from heaven saying that you should?
I think. Sorry to interrupt, but I think if we didn't know the Talmudic story and its interpretation, which we clearly do, so we're leaping ahead to its conclusion. I think it's entirely reasonable based on command theory that God's almighty and God commands various things through the mitzvot. And in this particular case, God has literally spoken. And these esteemed rabbis heard the voice of God. And God said, Hashem said, the halakha is according to Rabbi Eliezer. It's very hard to see how one can reason beyond the voice of God.
Right.
That's not reason, is it? It's like a gimmick. It's like
Hold
a
on a
bells
second.
and whistles. It's like using bells and whistles to sell a product. Loudville. It's like using bells and whistles to sell a product. It doesn't give the product any merit. It's just good.
Hold on a second. Hold on a second. Noah, what are they trying to decipher over here? They're trying to decipher what's God's opinion in this particular case. We believe that the Torah is from heaven, that the Torah comes from God, right? And we're now debating, trying to figure out what's the law. Comes along the one that makes it and says, hold on a second, I'll tell you, the law is following this opinion. Okay, end of debate. I don't understand. You know what I'm saying? What's the gimmick? There's no gimmick over here. I can understand you could tell me the miracles are a gimmick. Maybe he has supernatural powers. Maybe he has the power of illusions. But when it's nobody came and said at this point, sorry, that was just a hallucination. Nobody said that. They didn't say and we're going to see that they don't stand up and say, sorry, mate, you're hallucinating. Or you got some really great, I don't know, some voical, you got, what's it called? Ventriloquism, that you're able to create some type of ventriloquist godly sounding. They knew exactly what it was. No one denied what it was. This was the voice of God in heaven. So what's gimmicky about that? I don't think
I would be sus
I don't see
about
how
it.
you can get any better than that.
I don't know. I'd just be sus about it because it's a very unusual way to settle an argument. I've never heard Hashem interject in any other argument. All of a sudden he does here. So this is so important that he does, and not in any argument, any other argument. You don't hear his voice. All of a sudden he interjects about this. So to me, I'd be very suspect about it.
Okay, so I think I've definitely spoken about this in the past, and that's why some of you are having difficulties about, or you've learned the story in the past yourselves. But I don't see how you can rationally argue with that at this point. How you could really argue in this point of the story, how you could truly argue with Rabbi Eliezer.
I'm gonna have to surprise you. I don't know the end of the story yet.
What?
I don't know the end of this story.
Oh, you don't know? Okay.
That's correct.
So that's why I'm struggling to understand how you could argue with Rabbi Eliezer at this point, because
I don't know, but I don't know the end of this story.
But you've argued the correct opinion without knowing the correct.
It's not my fault.
Okay, so the question is, I don't know how you can do that if you don't know the end.
It's the Jewish soul, Rabbi. That's what does it.
Okay, well, you've just proven the whole what's it called? The whole premise of this whole discussion, I suppose, is somewhat proven, even just through that little experiment. Sorry. So let's get back into it and let's conclude the story, okay? Because I think it was important to stop the story at that point and see where we were holding, what we were thinking, because I think from an objective point of view, if you were just looking at the story and you didn't know much of other Torah necessarily, I don't see how anybody can stand up and say that I would not follow the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer when you have God himself, so to speak, or a heavenly voice, a spiritual voice beyond the world telling us what the true answer is, if they're themselves trying to understand. Okay. So let's see what happens. What's the response? We're up to the point in the story where a heavenly voice comes and says the halacha follows Rabbi Eliezer in all cases, and therefore why are you arguing with him? In other words, saying Rabbi Eliezer is correct. Omar Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua stands up on Raglov on his feet. Va'omar, and he quotes a verse from the Torah in Deuteronomy. I might even open the link so that we can look at it inside. He says over here, Loi b'shamayim hi leimor. It says in the Torah, in Deuteronomy chapter 30, that the Torah is not in heaven saying, we spoke about this pasuk a few weeks ago when we brought the mimer on circumcision, but not to just to show the correlation, but we're not going to get it all into that topic. Lamar saying, "Mi yalalana shamayim v'yikachelanu v'yashbiyen roisa," saying, "Who can go up to heavens and take it from us and let us hear it, and we will do it." So, what is this saying? The Torah is not in heavens. Now, what does it mean that the Torah is not in heaven? What is he trying to say? Lei b'shamayim, the Torah is not in heavens. Where is the Torah? So the Talmud now explains what Rabbi Yeshua was saying. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah. So this is Rabbi Yirmiyah is now outside of the story, but giving an explanation on the story that has been retold in the Talmud. What was he saying? That it's not in heaven. Shekvar nitna Torah mehar Sinai. Yes, the Torah was in heaven, but when God gave us the Torah on Mount Sinai, it told us He gave the Torah to mankind, and therefore ein mashkichim b'baskol. You cannot now rely on a heavenly voice. Shekvar kasavta b'har Sinai b'Torah achrei rabim lahatus. Because the Torah already says in Shemot, what does it say in Exodus? It says, Achrei Rabim Lahatus, that you have to go a favor in the, now it starts off, I'm not going to get the beginning of the pasuk, but I'm just showing you in the source that it's telling us that we always follow, almost all cases, we follow the majority. There is a particular case where it talks at the beginning when we don't follow just the majority, but in general, we follow the majority. Okay, just the beginning of that verse was telling us that in a case of a murder case, in a case where it's a death penalty, then we need more than the majority. It's not enough to have a majority of one, we generally have to have a majority of two, just if that beginning of the verse was, it's not connected to our discussion over here, but just in case it confused you. Okay. Now that's the story. The Talmud goes on to say that later on, Ashkei Rabbi Nosson Le'Elio. Rabbi Nosson, another Talmudic sage, says that he bumped into Elijah the prophet. Elijah is one of these people that tends to visit. He's no longer living on planet Earth, but he tends to visit from time to time. A discussion for another time. And he says, Amalek. My Ovid Kuchabrichu Bahishaita. What was God doing at that moment? Omalei, he said, in other words, God is listening to this discussion from amongst the rabbis. He sends a heavenly voice to say, so to speak, which opinion he's following. And he says, what was God thinking when this rabbi down in the scholar down in the world tells God, "Yay, keep out of it, mate. We don't need your opinion." So he says the Talmud. So this is the same Talmud that you're telling the story. It says, "Kochayich." He laughed. In other words, God, so to speak, whatever that means, God laughs or he smiled. V'omar. In other words, the understanding was that God was, so to speak, expressing nitzchunai bonai nitzchuni. My children were victorious, my children triumphant. They triumphed over me. Okay. Now, the story has a little bit of a sad ending. I'm not going to get into the entire ending of the story, but I want to just tell you what actually happens and how serious the story was. And then I want to ask you, what is your opinion on the story? Because it has a sad ending. Now, I want you first to understand who Rabbi Eliezer was. This Rabbi Eliezer was considered at the time to be one of the definitely one of the most respectable rabbis. But when it came to a person that had full knowledge of what had been said in the past, Rabbi Eliezer was considered that opinion. Amru, they said, Rabbi Eliezer, they brought all those things that Rabbi Eliezer had said had been pure for sorfum ba'esh, and they burnt them in fire. V'nimnu alav, and then they reached a consensus ubachu, and they blessed him. Now, if you look in the English, you'll see it says, and they ostracized him. He was ostracized. Amru. Now the Talmud says, who is going to go and tell him? Amalahem Rabbi Akiva, I will go and tell him. In other words, there's nothing sadder that a rabbi can hear than this, that he's now been told that he is not allowed to attend the Talmud. Now, we know that in one thing we allow, and I said it earlier, is we allow debate. But here, something happens. You have literally one of the greatest rabbis of the time, that he has a debate. The debate is argued. It's ruled upon, a majority rules on one side. The one rabbi does not accept it. And as a result, he starts bringing miraculous proofs, and they ostracize him. And they need someone to go tell them. Rabbi Akiva says this is not necessarily directly connected to our story. Ani eilech, I will go. Shema yelech adam she'eni hagim, because lest there be a person that goes there that is not befitting. Rabbi Akiva, we know of being one of the greatest sages in all of history. And he said, I'll go. If the wrong person goes and tells him, the pain will be so terrible, so tragic for Rabbi Eliezer that he can destroy the entire world. But if I go, then my power, so to speak, will be able to either break it lightly and also prevent him from being able to do anything harmful. Okay, now the story gets, I don't want to get caught up in the rest of the story. It is interesting, but maybe if we have time later on. Okay, but that's not connected to our direct discussion today. It's a disturbing story, because here you have a man that is a pious, holy, good man, but he's being ostracized because he's not willing to accept the ruling of his colleagues, and he's resolving to use other ways. Now, remembering our discussion, and this is the power now of Akiva's question. That's why I wanted to dedicate a shir to it. If God tells you that you're not allowed to do child sacrifice, you're not allowed to sacrifice a child, and then the next day he comes to Abraham and says, I want you to sacrifice a child, and Abraham goes and listens to him. So Akiva's question is, how come then Abraham was able to go and listen to him, while over here God tells us one thing, and then he comes and contradicts? He says, yes, you go over the majority, but then he comes and he sends a heavenly voice, and he, so to speak, contradicts that voice. And over here, Rabbi Eliezer, for listening to the voice of God, is ostracized. Seemingly, he's did exactly the same thing as Abraham. Is that a good way of explaining your question, Akiva? Yes? Okay. So we're not trying to hide anything. We're trying to keep everything above water and put everything on the table. So how are we going to answer such a question? So we have to start off with understanding a few things. I took a long time on this text because it's the main text of our discussion. But the truth is that it's not the main text of our discussion. The main text of our discussion we're going to find in Maimonides. But we're not going to have time to go through all the text. There's 3 or 4 main texts. We'll see how many of them I could actually go through. So we have to understand how it could be that when the Torah, so to speak, evolves, we have the Abraham time of the Torah and we have the post time of Torah. So I can tell you the very basic answer to the question as in the most basic element of this discussion, but it doesn't fully answer the question. The most simple answer that I could think of is that Avraham Avinu is before the Torah has said that you have to follow the majority, so to speak. Okay, fine, but that doesn't really answer the question. Why? Because Avraham Avinu understood that the will of God was we don't sacrifice children. So he had, so to speak, received it. Maybe it wasn't to the same way as God has written it down. So in order to understand this, I want to tell you another episode. The other episode occurs, there's two episodes that I'll tell you about. The one episode is in the time of Moses, the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu is approached by 5 young women. These young women are known as the daughters of Tzalafchad. And these daughters of Tzalafchad, they say, our father passed away, and he has no sons, and therefore he was supposed to inherit a portion of the land of Israel, and there's no one to inherit the land of Israel. What shall we want to inherit in his place? Why should our father not get a portion of Israel because he never had sons? The law is that it goes through the sons. Now Moses doesn't know the direct answer, so he goes and he says, okay, no worries, I'll go ask God. And Moses, in his ability, he goes and he says, hello, God, how's it going? And he dials the number. And it's the old phone, so he has to dial the circle way, go all the way back. And he dials God. No, he didn't even have to do that. And he gets the answer. Dring, dring. Yes, God, how you doing? Just like they do it in the good old days. Okay, let's fast forward to several decades later. Not even several decades later, a few years later, or maybe even less than a year later. I don't know the exact time, but it's not a long time, because that episode happens in towards the end of Moshe's life in the time of the desert, from if I recall correctly, when Moshe is already starting to discuss giving out the land of Israel. So the end of the 40 years. Moses passes away. Joshua takes over. Joshua takes over, and there is a question. There's a question. I can't remember exactly what the question was, but there's a halachic, so to speak, a halachic question. And the people come and they ask Joshua, this is our dilemma. What's the answer? So Joshua says, I don't know. We'll have to figure it out. They say, figure it out? What do you mean? Just go and ask God. Aren't you the replacement of Moses? And he says, no. There's Moses and there's Joshua. They're two different people. So they say, like, well, what do you mean? You don't get messages from God? You're not a prophet? He says, no, I do. But Moshe and Joshua are different. What does that mean? So what occurs is Moses, he says as follows. When in the times of Moses, when Moses had a question, he was the giver of the Torah. So if there was something that was unclear and he didn't know the answer, that means God hadn't actually relayed that concept to him yet. And it was a new concept. But once the Torah was given to Moshe, we had the entire Torah in completion. There was nothing else to add to the Torah. And therefore, from now on, if we have a question from the Torah, we have to go and figure it out ourselves. God has gave Moses principles of how to figure out the Torah. And now, yes, I do have a path to God, so to speak. I am on talking terms with God, but not about the Torah. That's a conversation we can no longer have. Now God wants that conversation to happen amongst ourselves. Why? Because only Moses has the ability to discuss Torah with God. Any other human being that says that they've discussed Torah with God, don't believe them. At least not if it's going to make any changes. How do we see this? Let's look inside. This is really important. It's a fundamental concept within Jewish study, and one of the most important concepts. I forgot one text when I was preparing text before the shiur. I actually forgot one text, which is the text of the 13 Principles of Faith, which is probably one of the most fundamental texts over here. So I didn't prepare it, and I don't want to start searching for it now because we're running out of time. But principle number 9, there's 13 principles of faith. In other words, fundamental principles that the Rambam says, these are the things that Jews are fundamental to Judaism, so to speak, non-debatable. And these are agreed upon by all scholars. Now, principle number 9 is this concept, and we're going to discuss it more at length now, that the Torah is everlasting and unchangeable. Okay? Now, it's a principle. That means it's not debatable. That means that it's an accepted concept, that this is a fundamental of our belief. Thank you, Akiva. The Torah will never be abrogated. Nothing will be added to it or subtracted from it. God will never give another law. Okay? Thank you. That's a fundamental to our belief. The Torah cannot change. So, with that in mind, let's look at the laws of the foundations of Torah from Maimonides. This is right at the beginning of Maimonides' book, his major book of Mishnah Torah. Maimonides, of course, lives in the 11th and 12th century, and one of the greatest codifiers, if not the greatest codifier of Jewish law in all of history. For simplicity's sake, we'll read it in English, and he says as follows: it is clear and explicit in the Torah that is God's commandment remaining forever without change, addition or omission, or diminishment. Maybe I should get somebody else to read tonight. As it says in the Pasuk in Devarim in Deuteronomy, it states. Now I actually opened this over here. Look at what it says in the Torah. Okay? Everything that I've commanded you, you shall always guard to do that act. Do not add to it, and do not decrease from it. Okay? A clear pasuk in the Torah. First and foremost, we have to know the Torah lasts forever. We cannot add and we cannot subtract. And that's for all times. That has never changed. That will never change. Let's go back to our text. All these matters I command you, you shall be careful to perform. You may not add or diminish from them. Now, it says else, what is revealed is for us and for our children forever. Let's look at that in the Torah. Hanistarot, what is concealed from God, and that is which is revealed, lanu is for us and our children, adolam, forever. So nobody can tell you that the Torah was for the past. La'asot et kol divrei Torah azot, to do all, fulfill all these words. Okay, that is chapter 29 of Deuteronomy, or Devarim. It tells us that all of the Torah is forever. It cannot change. Now, let's get back to the Maimonides, and then I want to actually get back to the other verses. This teaches us that we are commanded to fulfill the Torah's directives forever. It also said it is an everlasting statute for all your generations. Okay, that's the next chapter. It is not in the heavens, like we just said. We quoted from the Talmud. This teaches that the prophet can no longer add a new precept to the Torah. Therefore, if a person will arise, whether a Jew or a Gentile, and perform a sign or a wonder and say God sent him to add a mitzvah, withdraw a mitzvah, explain a mitzvah in a manner which differs from the tradition received from Moses, or if he says that the mitzvahs commanded to the Jews are not forever, but rather were given for a limited time, as in not necessarily relevant anymore, he is a false prophet. He comes to deny the prophecy of Moses and should be executed by strangulation. Now, Maimonides has some great opinions, right? Where does he get this from? Because he dared to make a statement in God's name which God never made. So it's considered one of the worst things that you could ever do is called the false prophet. And we've had plenty of them throughout history, especially in the days when there was real prophets, the time of Jeremiah and the destruction. Jeremiah was there telling the Jewish people he was a real prophet. People knew he was a real prophet, but they didn't want to believe him because he was prophesying by the destruction of the temple, and the Jewish people had to repent, and that takes work. They didn't want to do that. And then there was false prophets that claimed to be prophets as well, and said, no, don't worry, you're doing good. Do all the badness that you have continue to do, and nothing bad's going to happen. And they believed him, and that's why the destruction happened, the destruction of the first temple. So we've had plenty of these false prophets throughout history.
Rabbi, just to put context around this, the time period that this was written.
So this is Maimonides.
Yeah. So
11th, 12th century.
Thank you. just for the other people listening.
Yeah. Thank you. So God blessed his name, commanded Moses that his commandment is for us and shall forever, and God is not man that he speak falsely. Now, Rambam goes through all this. He goes into all of it now in the next ones, and he talks about how do we know what the proofs are for this. So he brings over here what it says in, I will appoint a prophet from amongst your brethren like you. How do we know that? So how do we know when to believe a prophet? So he says, when you believe a prophet, when he's like you, as in he's got all the factors that Moses had, he was very pious, very holy, and I will place my words in his mouth and he will speak. Now, he's not coming to establish a new faith, but rather to command the people to fulfill the proofs of the Torah and warn against transgression, as evidenced by the final prophet, Malachi, who proclaimed, remember the Torah of Moses, my servant. Now, this is, once again, not all. Let's look back over here for a second. This is the back into the, I'm jumping back and forth between the Maimonides and now back into the Torah, into Deuteronomy. He says, this is back in the Torah, Ki akum b'cha navi, when it will arise amongst you a prophet, or cholem chalom, or someone that has a dream. Some prophets came through dream. And he gives you a sign or a miracle. Now, you would think that because he's performed a miracle, you should believe him. It says, and comes along this sign and this wonder, and now he comes and tells you, he says, okay, I've proven to you that I'm a prophet. Why? Because I did miracles. I made crazy things happen. I did magic, whatever it is. Now, I want you to go and serve other gods that you didn't know. So this is a prophet. This is someone that's coming to tell you to believe in other things, not to listen to God, even though he's done the miracles. So says the thing. What does the Torah go on to say? Moses continues speaking. Lo tishmal divrei hanaviyahu. Do not listen to that prophet. O cholem cholemu. Ki menaseh Hashem lokechem eschem, because God is trying you. Ladas hayishchem oyavim et Hashem lokechem chol levav chol nafshechem. He wants to know if you truly love God. He's testing you. What's the fundamental concept? He says Moses. Achrei Hashem lokechem telechu v'yisei Torah v'smashet shmei kol lishmo. Always follow the way of God, keep his Torah and mitzvot. He starts off, once again, that the Torah that exists is for you forever to safeguard it, to not add and not to transgress. What's sign number one that somebody is a false prophet? Is if he tells you to go against any letter of the law. If he tells you to go against a single letter of the law, that's a very clear sign that he's a false prophet. It's in black and white in the Torah. Okay? Now, this is what many people see as the ultimate, I don't know what the right term is, but the ultimate prevention from the Jews following the path of JC, of Jesus, or Muhammad, or any other cult. Why the Jews never fell into that bust? Because of these verses. Because to the Jewish people, it was very clear that once Moses had given us the Torah, no one can change it. And that's why when Joshua was asked, will you stand up and go and ask, when he was asked a question, and he says, can you tell us the law? And they said, just go and ask God. He says, no, that's not a possibility anymore. Because if I do that, and then we're saying that something can be changed post Moses. And we know that for 3,333 years, the Jewish people have been following exactly the same Torah to the T. Nothing's changed. Nothing can change. People can think, oh, maybe we will at some point change it. No, we could derive things differently. We can change what a legislation. I'm not going to get into all the different types of laws that can, but if a birthed in from a past time made some type of legislative law, like let's say they said, the Torah says you're allowed to marry more than one wife, but we're saying that it's not good, and therefore it's called, they outlaw polygamy, right? Like Rabbi, just forgot who did it. Like, I just forgot the name of him. Like was done some 1,000 years ago, that they said that polygamy was outlawed, at least in Ashkenazi worlds. It will come back to me, his name in a moment. But that was a temporary enactment. And later on, rabbis had the right, in theory, to retract on that. Okay? But if it's a law which is clearly stated in the Torah, or it's also a clearly stated law that comes from the oral Torah, as in the Torah that Moses described to us, it can never be argued upon. Ezra HaSofer, no, it's not Ezra HaSofer. Not, I'm sorry. Don't mean to. It was. I'm just can't totally blank. I've given Shiram on him. He's known as Lazar. All right, it'll come back to me soon. It was 1,000 years ago. Balagoyle is called the Rosh HaGoyle. Okay, it'll come back to me soon. If somebody wants to do a quick Google who outlawed polygamy in Judaism, you will see straight away the answer will come up. But I don't want to do it with Shir. I've just gone totally blank. I've given Shiram on him before on the whole concept. But that is a law that, by the way, when he instituted that law, that was something at state, that was a new legislative law. Those type of laws can be changed at times. But if it's a law that was clearly given by Moses on Mount Sinai, and it also had or any of the oral traditions that were given by Moses from Mount Sinai, that can never be changed. That has allowed the Jewish people to remain the Jewish people for the last 3,300 years. Now, I want to jump ahead and take you on a little bit of a jumping some 800 years further. And we're now going to look at a text of a really interesting individual. I don't have time to discuss his life, not that I know that much of life now, but a man by the name of the Ben Ish Chai. The Ben Ish Chai was the chief rabbi of Baghdad, which had a very strong community. Rabbi Gershon, thank you. Yes, that's exactly what it is. Yes, Rabbeinu, he's known as Rabbeinu Gershon. Rabbeinu Gershon, he's considered like one of the great Ashkenazic rabbis, and he's the teacher of Rashi. Okay, so he banned polygamy in his day, at least for Ashkenazic Jewry. But let's get back to the story of the Tanur Achnai. The Tanur Achnai is the debate over there. And let's look at the way the Ben Ish Chai explains it. And I don't have I couldn't find a translation, so we'll go through what we have. And he writes a commentary on the Talmud, the Ben Ish Chai. And this is what he says. He was, by the way, he passed away in something like 1904, 1906 or something like that. So he's more recent history. V'da ki bevadai hagomer. It was with absolutely certainly. Kol oisis asher osu min hashemayim. La'azar es Rabbi Eliezer. V'gam yetzias habaskol azrasei hakol haya bashkacham eis Hashem yisborach. All those miracles and that heavenly voice that occurred in that episode in the debate happened from God. Those miracles happened from God, and they were there as a directive. Remember, I said to you that we don't have, as far as I know, other episodes where miracles are used to answer a debate. The only other episode that I can think about where miracles are used to answer debate is with Elijah the prophet on Mount Carmel. A story for another time if you don't know what I'm talking about. But Talmudic a debate which has thousands of debates within the Talmud, There's no other miraculous use of miracles. Why was it? He says this is a fundamental episode of the story. It's not just a small story, this little story, this debate. This was a fundamental story. That wasn't just to go and ostracize one of the greatest rabbis in the time. You don't do that just like that. He says, why was it there? It was there to make a rectification to the world for now and for future. To make for this a strong foundation. This gave, every time I click on something, the sidebar pops up and it's annoying, sorry. And this creates a very strong establishment and security to the words of the Torah. That you shall never have arising any wise scholar or elderly person. That's also another way of describing a scholar. Afilu imhu gadol b'chachma, even if he's tremendously great in wisdom. V'yochid b'doirei, and he could even be the greatest in his generation. Lahoiris mashaliba gozer, hoifich rabim, to go and to guide or to rule in Torah law what he believes or he understands if it goes against the majority. And what would happen if he were to do that? Because that would create abundance of arguments. That would cause that the Torah should be like 10 Torahs. Because if you're going to have this guy will say, well, he's the greatest rabbi in the world, and these other 10 people are not as great as him. It doesn't work that way. If once they've leveled into the top scholars, whatever that category is, however, not discussion for another time, once they've reached that level of being able to have an opinion, so to speak, their opinion is one of the opinions. And that opinion is just as equal as the greatest opinion. And the Torah establishes a rule that we have to go after the majority in all cases. I'll get your question in a moment. I just want to finish this and then we'll get your questions. And God was well aware that those wise people takifim, he knew that they were strong, and they were truthful. And even though they're going to see these great miracles and wonders, and they'll even hear a heavenly voice, and they will hear this heavenly voice, which is deciding, like the one individual, they still will not be willing to nullify that what it says in the Torah, achrei rabim lahatos, that you follow the majority. Levilti yisturu davar echad min haTorah. They were willing to do that, to, so to speak, go against the word of God in order not to contradict one word in the Torah. And that's what I say. What saved us? What saved us from not falling prey to all the New Testaments and the progressive religions and progressiveness within Judaism, even to a certain degree, in progressive interpretations and reinterpretations and all different types of cults and things that all offshoots from the Torah, and just said, no, it's no longer relevant. Was these words in Deuteronomy. And this episode was the ultimate trial, where you had one of them, one of the greatest one of them, and he was not, they were not willing to give in. Because anybody can stand up at some point, not anybody, but it will happen at some point that somebody will come and have some type of powers and be able to do some type of miracles and say, God spoke to me. So how are we going to prevent that from happening? How is it that the Jews were the last people to accept Christianity? or the only people that didn't when they went to those countries. And that we're still here today. What prevented us from doing that was these teachings. Okay, so I'm now going to get to answering Akiva's question, which is what the whole class is based on. And I think the answer is pretty clear. But before that, I want to let Joe ask his question. Go ahead, Joe.
Sure. The section we just finished reading there, I just want to get the timing right of that last write-up versus the timing of the Shulchan Aruch, because it talks about avoiding a multitude of, multiplicity of interpretations of Torah, of a unified approach. And the Shulchan Aruch, you could argue, is very much that unified approach. That's why it was written, to provide an agreed, a consensus of what Judaism is. Was that right up pre or post Shulchan Aruch?
Pre.
So it was before Shulchan Aruch, and then the
Shulchan Aruch, just for those that so I'll clarify your words like you clarified my words. Shulchan Aruch is written in the 16th century, in the 1600s, I should say, 15th century, by Rabbi Yosef Karo and Rabbi Moshe Isserles. That's the code of Jewish law. So yes, it precedes that by a good 500 years.
So there was a recognition, say 500 years earlier, that the debate and the lack of those rules of engagement could result, and there was a danger, could result in a multitude of interpretations, which would then fragment the Jewish people. That's fair enough, I agree. And so, and then, over the centuries, then the Shulchan Aruch comes along to provide that core that everyone agrees to. Yeah, but there's still room for interpretation. I just want to, something you said earlier is that
I'm not exactly getting what you're trying to say. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's
I think
right.
you're trying to say something more important, which I think I'm missing.
Okay, so you're saying that those words, those phrases protected the Jewish people from those risks, basically, and gave the example of Christianity. Yet, where did Christianity come from but from the Jews? So it wasn't universally protective.
Well, if you were to take the average Christian and you were to show them that, that's a very strong question on Christianity. So that's Christianity was originally started in order to get Jews, and if you learn the history of Christianity, they were not very successful in getting Jews initially. So I don't get into the whole history of Christianity, but they were far more successful at getting non-Jewish people that did not know the Torah well and weren't, so to speak, brought into the Torah. And that's what Christianity developed from. Okay, so Christianity that's a big question on Christianity. And I suppose they may have some attempts in answering that question, but that question on Christianity remains. That has remained to be a protection against Christianity throughout the generation.
Yeah, I'm just saying that all the early Christians were Jewish.
And in that time, they kept the Torah. It was only later on when Paul saw that they weren't managing to convince the Jewish people that Jesus was the Messiah, so to speak, or their savior, whatever it was that they were trying to teach at the time. According to the Jewish tradition of the history, I'm sure there's different Christian versions, but there's definitely a different Jewish version to what actually occurred. And I suppose we would want to believe that our version is correct. But the Jewish version is that those people were Jews that were followers of this person. And at that time, they still kept the Torah 100%. Jesus would have been a fully law-abiding Jew. And so were the apostles. But then they afterwards, when Paul, so to speak, took over the leadership, he realized that, and he realized that he wasn't getting the Jewish people to follow this new way, and he was going to go to the Gentiles, but the Gentiles weren't going to be willing to accept Judaism with all its many laws. It was just too bothersome. So he said, you don't no longer have to keep all of the laws. And some people actually believe, I'm not saying believing, there's actually certain books that write that Paul was actually doing it to save Judaism. Now, I don't know how true that is, because that's written in particular books. I think it's written maybe Sefer HaToldos, which is the Book of Generations, that Paul was doing that. He was actually a pious Jew trying to save Judaism, and therefore what he did is he didn't want Jews to initially. I don't want to get into this because it's a little bit of hearsay, as in it's not necessarily 100% true, but it's definitely written in some books that Paul actually did it to save Jews by saying, well, if we say that you don't have to keep all the laws, what we will do is we'll get non-Jews to join this new religion, but it'll also prevent us from getting Jews to join the religion, because no Jew will go and join a religion that says stop keeping Judaism, because it's very clear in the Torah not that you shouldn't do that.
So all the early Christians were aware of the principles that we've just learnt tonight.
They were aware of it.
And they decided to not follow those principles?
So yes, in my understanding, yes. And it could be that they themselves kept them, but well, first of all, I'm not a major professor in Christianity, but in the research that I have done is that the early apostles kept the Torah, and they just, so to speak, had this belief in Jesus as being this leader, so to speak. And then later, Paul, who was perhaps the younger one, he kind of reinvented Christianity and made it more for the broader crowd, and he was the one that took away the law of the Testament. That's my understanding. I may be wrong, but that's my understanding. Yochanan, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say at the time of Jesus, of course, there were quite a few different sects within the Jewish religion, and in a sense, like the Assyrians and Qumran, I mean, they had their own particular way, didn't they, I think, the Assyrians.
Yeah, and some people try to say that they're connected to Christianity, but that's been pretty much debunked. And as a matter of fact, the Assyrians, if they did exist, which we just have one or two texts that prove them, in other words, people have tried to say that the Dead Sea Scrolls belonged to the Assyrians, the Yitzumim. If they did exist, then their principle was not to get married, so they wouldn't have lived too long, right? You can't live very long if you don't get married and have children. So they couldn't have been anything that went on for too long. Even if they did exist as people understood them to exist. But that's a whole discussion in of itself. Maybe one day we'll discuss the Dead Sea Scrolls. I don't know if Akiva, you came to that JLI class where we did the Dead Sea Scrolls. Did you come to that one? Do you remember? You came to some of my early JLI courses in Moorabbin. You don't remember. Okay, well maybe one day we'll do the Dead Sea Scrolls again.
I'll check my bookshelf. I've got a good collection of the JLI courses.
I think that was in the Great Debates course.
It was part of Great Debates. That one I definitely did, yes.
Yeah, I think it was the first class of Great Debates. Okay. Anyway, Joe, did that answer your question?
Yes, it did.
Okay. Okay. So let's just conclude. We've already gone over time, but I think it was an important question. Let's conclude with understanding that we've only touched the surface in this discussion. There's a lot more to discuss. But I find that Ben Ishrai that we just learned, the Ben Yoyara, on the commentary to be very, very powerful. And it's to me, it's one of the most powerful pieces in all of the Talmud, because this story, which seems on the surface to be a little bit of a strange story, ends up becoming the, what's the word that I'm looking for? The major foundation of how we understand all of Torah study, what it means that Torah is not in heaven. That once we have received the Torah, it could never change, and nothing in the Torah will ever change. People that think certain laws that they'll get outdated, and eventually people, the rabbis will eventually wake up and they'll be marrying two people from the same gender. It ain't happening. It's never going to happen. No authentic rabbi is going to do that, because we can't. Not because we don't like it, not because we don't have love for those people, not because those people, because we simply cannot. I cannot say that I'm a Jewish, religious, Orthodox rabbi that follows the true letter of the law and do that. even as much as the culture and as much as I may want to do it, I cannot unless I try to change the meaning of the verse. And as soon as I'm changing the meaning of the verse, then I am suddenly no longer fitting within the principles that it says you cannot add and you cannot detract. And this is what allowed Judaism to continue, and it is all for all and will continue for all time. So what this does mean, it doesn't mean that Judaism cannot adapt to the times. The times are changing. Scientific exploration and things like that have opened up the Torah in new ways, in more incredible ways than ever before. The halachic debate and discussion is stronger today than it's ever been, because with each new invention, with each new discovery, like IVF and surrogacy and medicine and Shabbos elevation, electricity, and all these new things that we're now able to do, we have to now try to find within the words of Torah, what is the law? But it has to still remain within the principles. We have to try to find within those principles where the law stands, because that's all we can do. We cannot go and ask God to have a prophecy to tell us what to do. We cannot go and see what is the most popular cultural thing, what is believed to be the most moral thing in those times, because our morals are something that stands forever. Avram Avinu, on the other hand, he didn't have that establishment. His law was, whatever God tells me today is the most important law. And therefore, yes, God may have told me a rule, and that rule applies and still applies. But when God tells me the exception to that rule, and what he understood when God told him to go and bring his son as a sacrifice, that was God himself telling him to go and bring his son. And therefore, that stood, because there was nothing that had taught him that would contradict him, because the word of God is what stood. But today's day and age, the only way that we can change the word of God is if, you can't, because the word of God is everlasting. You simply cannot change it. Now, there's a lot more to discussion with sometimes we can temporarily go against something. The story of Elijah the prophet, where he temporarily breaks the law. Sometimes laws can be temporarily broken. Sometimes, and I say sometimes, it's a very rare, and it has to be from a very respectable person, but it can never be broken for a long term. No law can ever be broken long term. Okay. So that concludes our discussion tonight, and I'm hoping that we now understand what's the difference between the story of the Achnai Yavan and the story of the sacrifice of Isaac. In the Achnai Yavan, he was ostracized. Why? Because the law had been established by Moses in the time of Moses, that we go through the majority. And by him not being willing to accept it, even though he heard a heavenly voice, the heavenly voice was not able to contradict it, because it would be contradicting a law in the Torah. The time of Abraham, that law had not been placed, the foundation had not been placed on, and therefore you could have a word of God, so to speak, contradicting a previous word or making an exception. And therefore, we as Jewish people have no issues or have no debate about which direction the Torah is going to go and which laws are going to come and go and change. We know for certainty that our way will go and continue for many, many years to come, till the coming of Mashiach.
Amen.
Okay.
So Rabbi, one last question, if I may. So the Torah is on earth for the humans, not for Shemayim. So I think I remember a debate about whether the laws of the Torah that we've been discussing, don't add, don't subtract, don't change, whether that principle only applies ba'aretz, not Shemayim. When Jews venture into space, those principles still apply. It's not aretz anymore. Say the space station.
We used to say that they used to say that when you're on the plane, can do whatever you want because Torah lo b'shamayim.
Well, the plane, yes, balloons, plane. If
Torah
you
is
know,
not in heaven, so once you go in a plane, you can do whatever you want. Yes, that's certainly not the meaning of the verse, but it definitely could give us some giggles. I heard just today a podcast of a guy that pre-COVID, his job required him to travel some 200 days of the year. So his children would call him Avinu Shabashamayim, our Father in heaven. but yeah, that's certainly not the meaning of the verse. Okay, so I just want to conclude with saying this. Thank you everyone for coming. That's the end of the official part of the shir. We were only 20 minutes over. But if anybody wants to stay for any questions, feel free to stay, but please don't feel obligated. Have a very good night. Thank you so much. Yes.
I do have a question, and Leon looks like he might have a question too. So I think
sorry, go on.
Do you want to go first, Leon? I don't mind.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to ask, I don't know if it's applicable, but Jehovah's Witnesses refuse to have blood transfusions. And did they get that from Jewish law, or is that something that they decided to change the law? Or whether
it's an interesting question. It's a very interesting question. Do me a favor. You know what? Are you in a rush?
No.
No? Okay, because I'm going to take Rabbi Akiva again. I'm going to take Rabbi Akiva's question. We had you in the show today, Akiva. I'm going to take Akiva's question first, and I'll get to your questions.
Yeah, no worries.
A long one. So because Akiva's one is a shorter one, let's just get to Akiva first and see if it's how long that one.
You think, Rabbi Hella, after all these years, you think my question's a short one?
Let's just see.
Let's see.
I've dedicated so for an hour and a half plus the extra hour to your questions last week. Let's see.
I know. It was a fabulous answer. I'm very satisfied with the legal precedents, because essentially halacha, thanks to Devarim and Rambam and your more recent 20th century Talmudist, is clear. You can't add, subtract, or change, as Joe just summarized. But here's the problem, I think, going back to last week's question around child sacrifice and Avraham actually listening to God. So if the Torah principle is as clear as you've now established that it is, and we accept, and this is from a Chabad.org source, you'll have to forgive me for having done some research to prepare this question, that Avraham knew and kept Torah. Now, I remember hearing that some years ago, and so I did a little bit of research on the source for that. So that comes from, obviously, there'd be Talmudic sources, which you may be familiar with. I'm certainly not. But it comes from Bereshit 26:5, where Hashem is talking to Isaac, and he's offering Isaac the promise. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give them all these lands, and through your offspring, all nations of the earth will be blessed. That's the blessing for Yitzchak. But then Hashem provides the explanation, verse 5. Because Abraham listened to my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. So an interpretation of that is that Abraham knew Torah before it being handed down to Moshe. And therefore, on my lights and the fact that the Noahide laws were known at that time, again, Abraham should have followed the law and not the voice of God, for the same reason that in Achnai's oven, the majority of the rabbis said no to the trickery of Rabbi Eliezer.
Okay. Beautiful question. So this is what I would say on that. We know this question, by the way, is a really good question. It's actually clearly asked somewhere else. I once came across this written by another great scholar somewhere. It could have even been the Rebbe. But so I'll try to give you the answer based on what I recall from when I learned it. But it could have been the Rebbe, or it was definitely written in the book somewhere, your question. And from memory, as I say, this is just from memory. I could be not 100% in this answer. The weight. So Okay, so I'll tell you the question, the way the Rebbe, this question is asked by the Rebbe. He doesn't ask it with regards to the Akedah, the binding of Yitzchak, but he asks it with regards to other things. An example of where he asks this question, he asks this questions about Jacob, about Yaakov. Yaakov marries two sisters. Okay, and the Rebbe asks that we know that Yaakov Avinu and our forefathers kept the entire Torah. How could it be that Yaakov goes and marries two sisters, Rachel and Leah? The Torah clearly says that one man, while you may be allowed to marry more than one woman, but they cannot be sisters. That is very clear. You cannot marry two sisters. So it's a clear Torah law. And he chooses to. So there's a whole back and forth, and the Rebbe answers this question in some 10 pages. So I'm not going to try to answer that, and we could dedicate another share and a half to this question. But I'm going to try to give the gist of it from what I remember. And that is that he says that Yaakov Avinu, he knew what the law was, so to speak, going to be in the Torah, what the Torah law was. And he kept every law that he could, but he still was not commanded to keep the law. And when he was faced with a decision now, he had made a promise to Rachel that he would marry Rachel. And then his father-in-law goes and tricks him and makes him marry Leah. He now has to decide, what do I do? Do I follow my promise that I made to Rachel and marry Rachel and also go after my heart and my obligation, what I understand to Rachel? Or do I go over what I understand it's going to be, so to speak, that is the Torah law, but I have not yet been commanded? And he said, well, in this case, my obligation falls on my responsibility now. I have not yet been commanded not to marry sisters. And they have made my promise, and I have to keep my promise. And therefore, in this case, I don't have the ability to keep the uncommanded law. And therefore, my responsibility to Rachel will override my obligation that I've, so to speak, accepted upon myself. So in other words, the way our forefathers accepted Torah, they accepted it as so to speak, as a bonus. So there's a certain time, like for example, the law is that generally, when we accept certain customs, they become obligations. In Jewish law, customs become obligations. You start doing certain customs, you're not supposed to change that. However, if your custom is contradicting a particular law in the Torah, then you cannot, then your custom will be overthrown, right? Because your custom cannot over. So the same thing is, it's like over here, he was going to, on the one hand, he made this promise to Rachel. If he, and not only that, if I get back, the question gets even stronger. He even makes this, Rachel could have just, the reason why Leah was even able to marry Yaakov was because Rachel gave her a secret code that they had made beforehand. And why did Rachel do that? And she did that knowing that this could jeopardize possibly her opportunity to marry Yaakov, and she knew that she was destined to do it because she didn't want to embarrass her sister, which tells us that at that point, what was much more important keeping the Torah was not embarrassing her sister. So in short, my answer to you is, yes, there was the commandments or there was the Torah, but it was not a commandment. It was an additional obligation that showed that thing that they're going to be doing all the laws of the Torah. So when we talk about Avram fulfilling all the statutes of the Torah, it wasn't necessarily that he took them upon himself as though it's the law. So if it would have been the Noahide, I have to look into that verse again, but it could be that it's talking about the Noahide laws or the laws that he was commanded directly by God, right? And that those he accepted upon himself, but he didn't necessarily have it as the same weight as anything else. Okay, so I hope that answers the question. Okay, and that's why Avram was able to contradict so to speak, the law that he had accepted himself. Okay. Okay. Any other follow-up to that question, or should we approach Leon's question?
I do have one quick follow-up again regarding Abraham, the story of how he entertained the guests that came to him, and the fascinating aspect to do with Ben Pekur, with serving the meat and the milk together, and how that plays into him accepting all the commandments, knowing in advance the obligations of kashrut, yet going to that extra effort to serve this very, very special Epicurean delight to the angels, to the guests.
What's the question?
So the question then is knowing in advance what the laws are. It's a huge debate in the Talmud, as you know, is whether Abraham was going to that extra effort to illustrate, to highlight the nuances of kashrut law.
Mm-hmm.
Or was it more a case that he wasn't obligated, therefore had flexibility because he wasn't commanded yet? So this is at the heart of
The question is, if he knew the law, why was he serving meat and milk together?
Yeah, and the motivation behind that, he knew the law so well, or was he serving the meat and milk together to illustrate, to prove that he knew the law so incredibly well that he knew of an escape clause that permitted this? Or was it a case that he wasn't commanded yet to follow kosher law and had the flexibility to serve that meal?
Sorry, I'm just actually looking if I can find the source again. I thought I might have opened it. I didn't open it.
Yeah.
Give me a second.
Is everyone familiar with this section of the Torah, by the way?
Probably not. So I don't want to get.
It could be a future shiur. It could be worthwhile.
Yeah. It's a little bit of a heavy topic in and of itself, but I just wanted to see if we could have a quick look at the actual pasuk. So give me 1 second, and I'll just quickly, because I want to go straight to Leon's question.
To Leon's question. While you're searching, though, I'll just mention the modern day corollary of that is the debate around whether cooking a cow's udder is permitted or not, because there's milk inside the udder, so that's meat and milk. That could be a very interesting future shiur.
Yeah.
I'll stop making trouble.
Okay. Let's just have a very quick, this is not in order. I don't know it by chapters. Chapters are actually Christian-made discussion for another time. But I know it more in the order of the aliyot. No. Okay. Sorry, I'm wasting time on this, but I just... Okay, let's hold your question for a moment. I'm just with regards to the Ben Pekur thing. That's just it's a big discussion. We have to explain to people what that actually means, that I actually understand the question, and just in short, I think it's also just interpretation. So it's less of a heavier question, in the sense that, in other words, the weight of the question could be that on that particular commentary that says that it was Ben Pekur, the question will remain. With regard to him serving meat and milk, I think Rashi brings, and that's what I was looking for. I think what Rashi brings is that there was actually a wait in between, or they did it in such a way that it would be okay for the time. So they didn't serve the meat and milk actually together. So I think Rashi actually answered that question. That's what I was looking for. Okay, so let's stop that for a moment. And let me just answer Leon's question. He's been very patient. It was an interesting question. So the question was about JWs. It's a problematic to actually give them a real name. I'm a little reluctant to give them the actual name because Jeho, whatever that word, is supposed to be the name of God in English, which therefore could be problematic to actually pronounce the name, according to some opinions.
Witnesses.
Witnesses. Okay, well, they're not witnesses. What are they witnesses to?
No, but it's what they call themselves.
I think many of them are very
Witnesses.
pious and good people.
So, Rabbi, would it be equivalent to saying Yud Hey Vav Hey? In other words, it's the same word.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. So some opinions would say that because that's what it's supposed to be. I think it's supposed to be the witnesses of God, so to speak. Some people also say even saying the word God could be problematic. So they don't believe in taking medication, listening to doctors, etc. Is that from the Torah? So, well, there's definitely elements of it which are connected to the Torah, and I see why you brought that question over here. But I don't want to answer it straight away because it's not directly connected to the topic that we're discussing, but it is connected to our discussion because if we're discussing following the Torah and staying real to it, then seemingly if they're saying that the Torah is going to cure, that cures come from God, and God is the one that's controlling the world, and the cure comes from God, then we shouldn't need to listen to doctors and things like that. And that should be quite obvious. However, Torah looks at it differently. So their proof, they're basing it on the Torah. But this is the problem when you learn the Torah without the commentary. The Torah was not made to be learned without the explanations. It simply was not. And that's why the truth is the Old Testament that we have, that they call the Old Testament, we call it the Torah, and they call it the Old. It's not old. It's not, there's no second version to it, according to our opinions, of course. They learn it without the juice and bones, without what's really going on over there. Now, there's another verse in the Torah when I think it's when Miriam gets plagued with the tsaras after she speaks, she says evil talk against Moshe. I think it's then, and it could be in another place over there, that it says v'rapo yirape. Or maybe it's another place. I may be getting confused. Maybe Noach remembers. But it says that he will surely cure. And if you look in the commentaries over there, it says mikan nitna rishus l'roife l'rapos. From there, you were given permission to doctors to heal. What this means is as follows. What this means is that yes, God is in control of and he decides whether or not we should be well or whether we should get sick. But just like the Torah, that God said, I gave you the Torah. Now I want you to figure out the laws from it by yourselves and not go and expect heavenly voices. Once I've given you the principles how to derive it, now it's up to you to figure out what the law is. The same thing is, he says like this, I'm going to give you certain health issues and things like that. But I will also give you people that will discover science, that will study science, and they'll study the way biology works, anatomy works, and things like that. And I want you to use people to help you recover. But at the same time, I want you to remember that it's not them that are curing you. The doctor does not cure you. God cures you, but he is God's messenger. That's the way Judaism looks at it. So therefore, Judaism is very, very pro-doctors in general. In general. Of course, there's exceptions in every rule, but in general, Judaism is very pro-science and very pro-doctors.
As facilitators, not as healers.
Say that again, sorry?
As facilitators, not as healers.
That's right. As facilitators, doctors are. If a doctor says, and by the way, I don't know if any of you are aware of the recent case of in England, and a discussion at the time. Rabbi Greenbaum wrote a really good article about this this past week. There was a case in England of a girl that was not well. And there was a battle. It was a Jewish family, religious family, and the doctors wanted to take her off life support, and they fought against it, and then the court ruled in favor of the doctors, and then companies in Israel, and they said it's too expensive from the on the government, and then Israel and America said they'd cover it, organizations, and they'd bring it over there, and again the court ruled against allowing them to go in that direction, and said. It's now becoming it's abuse to this person to keep them alive, That was the claim. So this was a great travesty from our perspective, because we consider it actually murder, even though you would say, well, she may have been in pain, etc., etc. But we believe that doctors have the ability to say, this is what I see, this is what I think, how we should be doing prognosis. But they should not be fortune tellers. They're not prophets to say when people are going to die. I know of many people that were told by doctors that they're going to die in a certain amount of time and lived many years longer. So we generally don't like to ask doctors, how long do I have, doctor? That type of question is not, it's not a question to have. We don't believe that that's the doctor's role. They could say, listen, the sickness is very severe, and you know, based on natural ways, I can't see how you will recover from this, and whatever it is, it could be that, but not to predict. There's a Rabbi Shishler from South Africa who has a bunch of, in his uncles and in his extended family, a bunch of them are doctors. And when their grandfather, when their father was going to pass away, they called him because he's like the rabbi of the family, and they said, you know, we want you to officiate. And he said, listen, you know, grandpa's still alive. I'm not even talking about this. And they said, listen, we're the doctors. Don't tell us. He's going to go any minute now. And he said, well, when he goes, give me a call, you know, type of thing. They wanted to kind of discuss everything and make all preparations. And he ended up living another good few years. That I think was his grandfather or something like that. So what I'm saying is that Judaism believes that doctors don't have power from in and of themselves. They're not the healers. They have the ability, God gives power to doctors, to people that study the way the bells work, to see what is the best way and approach of how this person should be healed. And we should be listening to what their opinion is. And when it comes to matters of medicine, their opinion is what counts, not rabbis, not medical, not rabbis' opinions when it comes to the actual health question. But, and that's what's important. Because of that line, it says, Mikan Rishus, from here is the ability to and once again, the reason why J witnesses don't say that is because they haven't learned the commentary on the Torah. So they learn it and they're just taken on face value, and therefore they come up with the understanding. But that's once again where you have to see how it's so important to actually just learn with the Torah with commentary. Learning Torah with commentary is almost meaningless, to be honest. Okay, I hope that answers that question. Did that answer the question, Leo? Good. Okay, any other last questions? No? Ideas for topic for next week? With questions, we've already had a few. The Ben Pekua subject, I don't know if I'm going to do that. It's not necessarily my line of work. Maybe we'll get Joe to do that one next week.
Can do a little bit, but look, the question of the Jewish approach to doctors in general, I think it's also very topical. What you just mentioned.
I gave a topic similar to that right at the beginning of this whole pandemic situation. I think it was perhaps June or May, June last year. It was more about pandemics within Judaism, so I touched on the subject. I'll have a think about it.
Yeah, the reason I suggested is that quite a few of the people have been involved in soul searching over the decision to vaccinate or not, and they don't realize, but at the heart of their indecision is whether they trust or don't trust their medical professional. And that's a fundamental question even now. We used to talk about the white coat effect. Is people approach a doctor and they used to treat doctors as the high priesthood and totally just about worship the doctor, and how wrong that can be. Whereas now we're moving towards patient-centered care, where the doctor, as Noah said, a facilitator, a channel of healing, an advisor, but the person who has the most effect on their recovery is actually the patient, not the doctor.
Yeah. Well, I think it is an interesting topic. I don't know if I want to get into the vaccination topic because I don't know if I know enough about it, in a sense that While my belief is, and I'll just say in short, my belief certainly is that people should get vaccinated. I know if certain individuals are watching this, they won't like that. And the reason why I would say that is, as Leon entered into this discussion, because ultimately we will go through the majority of doctors. So the direct discussion is today is, if we were to have this discussion, just like when it comes to halachic ruling, and our whole topic today was that we follow the majority when it comes to rabbis, to scholars. We don't go based on the majority of people, we go based on the majority of doctors. So it's not a democracy when it comes to medicine either. And this principle is throughout. And when we spoke about safety of security in Israel, the question was not about what does the majority of politicians say, because they could have political influences. It's not about what the majority of political people say. We would say, what do the majority of doctors say? Or maybe specialists or epidemiologists, or how do you say it? Epidemiologists. Say it, Joe. Just
Epidemiologists.
Epidemiologist. It's a little bit of a tongue twister for me. Epidemiologist. What they say, but generally, it's the general perspective of the medical world. What is the overarching opinions? And of course, you're going to have those opinions of doctors that will disagree, but you're going to have to try to find some type of consensus. And ultimately, I would say that the principles are the same. And therefore, I would say that ultimately the consensus amongst most doctors, and while there are probably a fair amount of doctors that are somewhat shaky when it comes to vaccination, we can't deny that there are doctors that are not that are shaky about it or not so pro it. We can't deny it. But at the end of the day, I do believe, and definitely doctors that I have spoken to within our community, or I've heard from, are pro the vaccine and do believe that everyone should be getting it. Another separate question is whether we should be mandating the vaccine and making all these very draconian laws about who, not even being allowed to step into a synagogue or a shul or a retail store if you're not vaccinated. That's a separate discussion that I certainly don't want to get into, because I don't think it's that clear that necessarily what the government is doing is correct. I'm not saying they're not. I don't know enough about it from a halachic perspective.
Yeah. No, I agree with you, Rabbi, and that's a very interesting religious and philosophical discussion to have. Not just that topic, but the general question of public health strategy, which means the majority, the average. We're all just numbers in a big spreadsheet. That's public health.
I was going to interrupt you. Please don't feel obligated to stay on, people. We're just talking now, okay?
Yeah. So public health is the big picture, averages and spreadsheets, and precision medicine is the picture of focused on one individual patient. And there's always a tension between those two. It's not that one's right and one's wrong. It's that both strategies are in play all the time. So if you're running a state, you have to make decisions for the majority, the population, and everyone's just numbers. But if you're the person deciding for yourself which vaccine and when, and what about these other conditions and medications, that's a very individualized decision, which is best done in consultation with your own practitioner who knows you really, really well.
Right, and that's why we're hoping that, I don't know what the rule is with the exemptions. I haven't looked if you can get an exemption from your own GP, or you have to go to other GPs or other government ordained. And I think it would be ideal if the exemptions would be issued by people's individual doctors. Are they?
That's an ongoing argument. It applies even with, say, NDIS, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, where people used to get assessed by the person, the medical practitioner who knows them best, who then writes their disabilities and needs. Right. And then the government, the federal government, more recently, they said, oh, no, the person who knows you best might be biased. So we would rather you get assessed by someone who doesn't know you. In the end, they abandoned that.
So you can be assessed currently?
Yes, by the practitioner who knows you best and knows your history. And you could say the same principle applies when it comes to exemptions, when it comes to treatment decisions, including vaccination or alternatives to vaccination, which there are a few alternatives. So that discussion is best coming from the medical practitioner that actually knows your history.
Right. Interesting. Very interesting. Maybe one day we'll have a discussion about it. It's a little bit too hot now, and I haven't yet got my head around it all. But
yeah, but it's consistent with Jewish practice. The only reason I brought it up is because it's completely feeds into the principles we're discussing tonight up to this point.
100%.
Is the rules that there's a majority rule of necessity. Sometimes, you know, you can only govern if you have a majority rule.
100%.
But when it comes to implementation of that rule, that's where the individual practitioner who knows you personally, that's where that becomes very important, or the rabbi who knows you personally.
Yes. Just one point that I was going to say before, that I said that doctors rule when it comes to medical things, but doctors don't necessarily rule when it comes to life and death situations. Discussion for another time. So that case in England, we believe that the doctors made the wrong decision. That wasn't their decision to make, to turn off the things, because what the meaning, they're there just to sustain life. That's the job of the doctors. And to decide to take life in from a Jewish perspective is out of the doctors. That's not a doctor's role. So, and that's possibly a discussion for another time.
That's a public health strategy. That decision smacks of public health, of government approach.
But in an appropriate way, from a philosophical point of view, if you're looking at society and you're looking therefore at political decision making, it's fine for rabbis and benefactors to drop into that situation in the UK and say, we'll offer effectively endless resources to keep this child or whoever it was alive at the cost effectively, because that's what it comes down to. Chinese philosophy, Confucianism, has quite a lot to say about, you know, these sorts of trade-offs, which we're quite happy to make in the West, because quite strongly influenced by, you know, Jewish principles in part, that we'll spend almost endless resources on saving a life if we can. But if there were not endless resources, and let's say it's the state of Israel, and there aren't benefactors from other countries who are coming in, then I'm quite interested in discussion for another time in the halakhic decision in that case. It's not so much to go against what we understand is, you know, inviolable kind of what they call, you know, kind of iron age, because these are very strong moral principles. But how do those principles actually get rolled out in what Joe is describing as a public health setting, where you've got the choice of spending. In fact, Peter Singer talks about this to make it squarely philosophical and ethical. Peter Singer talks about the cost of keeping one patient in the West alive on a dialysis machine because of renal failure or whatever, of hundreds of thousands of dollars, you know, over whatever period of time, compared to that same money that can be spent in saving multiple lives of people who would otherwise, you know, die from entirely curable diseases in other parts of the world. So even if you say it's Jewish, even if it's, you know, the right decision to save a life, at what cost? Because at some point you're going to not have, you know, health care for people who will otherwise die of cancer, heart attacks, and all the rest. I don't know if that's been looked at in details in some of the modern Jewish medical ethics commentaries.
I think I'm pretty sure it is. So okay, well, you know what? That's an interesting. If I before then find enough information, then we will discuss it next week or one of the future classes.
Oh no rush at all, Mendel. You've got plenty of things, and the parsha suggests many topics. So go with the flow.
I like it, but
in the fullness of time, because I think I read what
certainly does talk about that topic.
I think I read Rabbi Greenbaum's article, because it's partly based on, you know, his own experience and holding on to a life and being able to say goodbye, even if, you know, the child isn't going to necessarily live for much longer on the likely medical opinion. There does seem merit in that, but then I'm very interested in how we interface those sets of concerns to the public health concerns, because in ethical terms, I'm very keen not to trade off one life for another. So I'm not a consequentialist. However, I think consequences and overall outcomes are important for ethical decisions, because ultimately we run out of resources. So be very, very interested to hear one day what the learned rabbis, yourself included, have to say on that matter.
I don't know if I'll be able to talk about it from a public health perspective, because that is a little bit of a harder topic, and I appreciate that. But perhaps at least understanding the Jewish perspective as a start off, I think that's that's a really good starting point in understanding the value of life and end of life. Okay, well, that's definitely food for thought. So thank you for that. And I think we'll say goodnight.
Sounds good. We always end with extra questions, but I think you...
Well, when we enter into big topics, and it's like, oh, that's a sheer. I struggle sometimes finding sheer topics, and when it's a good question, why would we try to get it down in 5 minutes when we could do it properly in an hour or a bit more?
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi
Thank
Halla.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Very
Thank you,
much.
everyone.
Good night, all.
Thank you, Nach. Thank you, Akiva. Thank you, Joe. Thanks, guys. Thank you, everyone else. Have a good night.
Good night.
Bye for now.